But again, Chuck has been involved in so many projects. He founded the East Cascade. It was the East Cascade Bird, Conservancy. Now it's called the East Cascades Birds Alliance. He was the founding member of that. He's written an Oregon bird site guide. He's the author to Common Birds of the Deschutes River Canyon area. So his being willing to give this program tonight. He's going to be talking about the birds of Central Oregon, those that are doing well and those that are in decline, and maybe what we could even do to help them. So I'm very excited to announce Chuck Gates as our guest speaker tonight. So if the Zoom is working, let's have, yes, Chuck begin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Salem Audubon for having me come and talk to you tonight. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I'm a longtime Central Oregon resident. In fact, I was born in Canada, but I moved to Central Oregon before I was even 1 full year old. So I consider myself to be mostly a native anyway. And I spent my college years in Southern Oregon State University in Ashland, and then I taught biology at Culver High School for 5 years, and then I ended my career at Crook County High School, where I taught biology for 25 years. All of that might give you an indication of kind of who I am and what I am and how I am. You'll notice that I didn't say anything about statistics in describing myself there. This entire program today is going to show you some of the statistics behind the trends that are going on in some of the birds that live in my neck of the woods in Central Oregon. And I want to make it clear that I'm not an expert. I'm not a statistician. I'm not someone who comes up with these numbers. I'm simply someone who can glean the numbers off of the internet and present them to you, hopefully in a little bit of an entertaining way. What I'm going to do today is I picked about 50 birds, actually about 40 birds that I thought might be interesting to Salem Audubon because most of them are birds that you don't have over on that wet side of the mountains. These are high desert birds for the most part. A few of them will be birds that we both share, but I tried to pick some of the birds that you might not be too familiar with. So even if you don't like statistics, then maybe you could still have a pretty good time today. And so I picked those birds, and then we're going to take a look at them and see how they're doing as far as their population goes. Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they having trouble? We won't talk a whole lot about causes today because at the end we'll talk about a little bit about causes, and you'll see that the causes are in some respects vast, but in other respects rather basic. So we'll get to that then. So let's go ahead and go right into it here. The thing that initiated my involvement in this little project was that I found out about the North American Bird Conservation Initiative, which is a sort of a consortium of a whole bunch of people. You can look over there on the left side. There's a whole bunch of organizations there, and that's not even all of them, that all get together and share data and come up with an idea of sort of the bird health of the entire continent. And they do that every 2 or 3 years or so. And after reading the 2019 State of the Birds, America's Birds Are in Crisis report, then I developed this program to try to tell people a little bit about what's going on, especially with our local birds. And so this was kind of a local program. I've now given it to a lot of different places in the States because people may not live here in Central Oregon, but they still are interested in what's going on here. So anyway, this consortium then comes up with some numbers and looks at some past research and past data and publishes that data in a real kind of user-friendly format. And you can actually go online and search for all of those issues of the State of the Birds report, and they're all kind of interesting because they all try to cover a little bit different stuff. But in general, the state of the birds that is given to you in a real user-friendly form, and we'll take a look at that now. This is the 2025 report and kind of the main data page that gives you an idea of what's going on with the different kinds of birds. And it's not all bad news. If you'll notice up there, the dabbling ducks and diving ducks, the ducks are doing well. And it probably isn't too surprising that the ducks are doing well because they have people who are actually working very hard to make sure that duck numbers are high because they like to hunt them. And so we have those birds doing quite well because there are people who are actually getting involved and putting their money where their mouth is and getting some action done, getting some habitat improvement, and those numbers are going up. And we'll come back to that when we talk about what are some of the solutions that we might have to make this better all the way across the board. The 16% water birds are also going up in population, 16% in the since since 1970 is what they're talking about, and of course those little water birds are benefiting from the ducks habitat being improved by hunting organizations and Ducks Unlimited and things like that. After those two groups of birds, though, things start getting a little bit serious. The sea ducks themselves are going down 4% in the last uh, uh, 55 years, I guess, since 1970. 11% for western forest birds. The eastern forest birds are doing even worse at 27. Shorebirds are in trouble at 33%, minus 33% in that period of time. 41% for arid land birds, and then it almost got cut off at the bottom there, but that's 43% for grassland birds. Those last two categories actually describe the habitat, most of the habitat where I live in Central Oregon. So our birds over here are starting to have some real problems because, we'll talk about some of the issues that cause those problems. Um, One of the things that the initiative developed was that they developed a list of birds who are what we call tipping point birds. These guys are in a lot of trouble because their population in the last 50 years has dropped 50%. That means if they do that again in the next 50 years, then we're going to have we won't lose 100%. They won't go to 100% mortality probably, but 50% of what we have now will be gone again, and then another 50 years, 50% will be gone. And if we don't do something, those kinds of catastrophic kind of waterfall events are going to end up in causing some extinctions that we don't want to see. I highlighted a few Oregon birds of interest in Oregon in yellow. There, some of those birds are residents in Oregon. Some of them are migrants that come through. Some of them are just special interest to birders in particular. And you can kind of scan through there, and you might see some rather surprising birds like evening grosbeak or something like Heermann's gull. And you go, boy, I get both of those things, but as we'll see, even some birds that are very common can be in trouble. And you may not even notice it until they've already reached that tipping point. So these guys are birds of special interest that people are working on, and you'll get an idea of some of the species that are in a little bit of trouble for as far as their overall population goes. What causes this kind of trouble? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff over there on the left-hand side. You can see that there's habitat loss and collisions with different kinds of human structures and pollution in the environment and cats and the whole thing. All of that stuff comes together. If you combine all the other things into one cause and compare that to habitat loss, then you have a real big thing next to a real small thing, meaning that a lot of the causes and population problems that we have arise because of habitat loss, and we'll talk a little bit about how to remedy that a little bit. There are 3 billion birds fewer now than in North America than there were when I was in high school back in the 1970s. And that's just a shocking figure. And that's, again, the main figure that got me off the couch and got me thinking about creating a PowerPoint presentation and talking to people about, my goodness, we're really missing out. I'm one of those people that really enjoys birds, and there are 3 billion fewer of them now than there were when I was in high school, and that's very shocking to me. We're going to use some data from some different sources today, and I just definitely want you to understand that especially the two main sources that I use for the data that I'm going to talk about are both citizen science resources, and they may not be quite as clean. The data may not be as clean as maybe some data that's produced by trained scientists. But we're going to use that data anyway because that data is becoming more and more important as we use citizen science to develop real numbers of these populations that we're talking about. And we're using some of the programs that you're probably familiar with. For example, the breeding bird survey is one of the main data pieces of uh, research and data tallying anyway that we'll be using in this program. And another one is the Christmas bird counts. And then we'll use quite a bit of eBird for some more recent kinds of trends that we'll be talking about. All three of these things are run by just regular people like you and I. And but there are some pretty good safety measures that are taken to make sure that the accuracy is decent on the data that we gather here. But just so you know, you probably don't want to quote these numbers exactly because they are collected by non-scientists and may not be as quite as good as some of the data could be. So let's check in with some of the birds that we were talking about, and we'll look at them again. These are Central Oregon birds, not Salem birds, but I hope you'll enjoy a little bit of it anyway. So we're going to start off with the long-billed curlew, and this is a bird who has a very long bill, obviously. Females and males, the bill is slightly different shaped. The males, the bill is more curved throughout the length of the bill and shorter than the females. The females, the bill is relatively straight and then curves right at the very end. We see these guys a lot over in the Harney County area, over in Malheur. And when we see them in Malheur, we tend to see them in pretty wet grassland situations. And but they will leave those grasslands and go up into dry hills to have their young. Most people don't realize that. They think that they're probably often in deep grass somewhere out in the Malheur pastures, but they like to get out in the dry lands and the nests and the dry slopes to find their nests. Now, look at the red numbers at the top of their population in the northern Great Plains is actually going up for this particular bird. And but it's the population here in the far west is going down, and that data is comes from 1966 to 2006 breeding bird surveys, and we're going to use that group of data quite a bit in this presentation. And then in Oregon, since eBird has been in existence anyway from about 2012 to about 2022, the population and reports of this bird is down about 10%. Killdeer, you wouldn't think this is such a common bird. You wouldn't think that the bird could possibly be in trouble, but it is in trouble. The population decreased 40% from 1966 to 2006. So historically, this bird's been going down for a long time. And we in Oregon here lost 15.7% just in the last decade between 2012 and 2022. And so we look at those old population numbers, and we are a little shocked. But when we look at the eBird numbers from current situations, um, the trend continues, and so we eventually are going to have to do something about this if we want to continue to see those guys. Killdeer are named after their call, and they often are nest on gravelly areas like rooftops and gravel roads. Their eggs, if you've never seen them, are very camouflaged, very difficult to find. And I think most of you know about the broken wing act, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. The next one over here in Central Oregon, this is actually a pretty rare bird anymore. In the 1960s and 70s and 80s, it was pretty common to see burrowing owls in east of Bend and out in the Crook County area, and even a little bit in Jefferson County in Central Oregon. But today, the population is down pretty low. They're interesting because they will use artificial nesting. And in fact, in eastern or northeastern Oregon, there's a pretty big program to get these birds to nest in artificial nest boxes. Uh, they have a pretty good protection. One of their main predators is a badger, and they can sometimes fool that badger by having the babies make a little rattlesnake sound if that badger comes to the hole, and make that badger think twice about getting in and trying to eat them. Their scientific name is Athene canicularia, which means a little wise miner. Wise because it's probably an owl, and a miner because it lives in burrows. The numbers up here, 27.5% of them lost in between the 66 and 06 time period. And then it continues on, 32.6% loss in Oregon since 2012. And that's a rather shocking one. And you can almost see that happening over here. You can almost see these guys dwindling away. I know in my county, they're pretty difficult to find. I chunked the two night jars, the common nighthawk and the common poorwill together. These are two kind of denizens of the high desert. Anyway, they are found in other habitats as well. But um, the common nighthawk population dropped about 40% in the Western United or Western North America between 66 and 06. And that's a pretty steep drop right there. The nighthawk then has lost another 4.5% between 2012 and 22. So it's not a terribly steep loss, but continues to lose ground. The common poorwill, uh, we don't know exactly what its population is, because it doesn't fit breeding bird survey protocols very well, because you have to go out at night to be able to find these guys. And most of the breeding bird surveys start at dawn. So we don't have a whole lot of BBS data on these guys. We do have some eBird data, which shows just a little loss in Oregon, but it's not enough of a sample probably to make any real decisions. So we're not really entirely sure what's going on with the common poorwill, but certainly the common nighthawk has shown a real loss since the 1960s. Okay, sorry, I was having technical difficulties. Oh, I got to go back. My apologies. Something's happening. Okay. Okay. I'm going to, you can go ahead and read the descriptions over on the left. I'm going to talk mostly about the numbers in red here on these, because we're going a little bit too slow in order to get done by 7:30. Um, so this is the golden eagle. We saw a really nice one of these today in eastern Crook County. We went out to do a couple of surveys on some nature conservancy land over there. And we certainly had a couple of good sightings, but this guy right here, the population is relatively stable between the 60s and the 2006 number, which was good, because before that, before 1966, then the golden eagle, like many of the other birds of prey, had suffered some real degradation in their populations because of overhunting and especially poisoning with chemicals like DDT. But since then, their population was pretty stable. But since then, we've lost a few birds and lost birds in a kind of a not a shocking number, but a concerning number: 16.4% lost in Oregon, and from 12 to 22. That's not good. We need to do something about that for sure. Um, just to explain a couple of things over there on the left-hand side. Well, I'm not even going to do that because that's fairly self-explanatory. Let's see if I can advance this thing without jumping ahead by 3 or 4 slides. Kathy, are
So,
you trying to talk to me?
yes, I am. Since we were about 20 minutes late getting started with all our announcements, feel free to go beyond 7:30 because I noticed you skipped Ferruginous Hawks and I'd like to know more about them.
What did I
Uh,
skip through?
Ferruginous Hawks, and that's a
Oh,
particular favorite of mine.
okay, that's
Okay.
fine. I
Oh,
didn't realize actually I did that. For some reason, uh, my arrow keys are not working particularly well.
no
Let's
problem,
see.
but feel free to know that um, we started late, so don't feel rushed.
Yeah, I will. I will definitely keep that in mind. We have still about 35 slides or so to go, so we'll see. I think I didn't haven't quite gotten to Ferruginous Hawk yet. I got out ahead of myself a little bit, so I think we're okay. Let's talk red tails. Um, red tails are kind of a success story. They've been a success story since the late 1800s in the West, because since the 1800s we've been building artificial hunting posts for them about every 200 feet in the form of power poles that we've been putting up, and that's just about the height that red tails like to hunt from. So by doing that, we've been able to make them much more successful hunters than they were back in the days before the telegraphs, anyway. And so uh, this bird has had a pretty good success or it's been pretty successful in keeping its population under control and not losing very much. Actually had a population increase between 66 and '06. A very slight loss in Oregon in eBird probably doesn't even mean anything when you consider um, some of the mathematical little gizmos that they use to figure statistics. That 2.9% loss may not really even mean too much. So red tails are doing pretty well over there. You might understand most of that stuff over there, except for maybe the movie thing. One of the things that I think is very interesting is if any eagle, any raptor you see on TV, they show every time they show one, I go, oh great, they're showing a bird on TV, and then they always use the same exact call. They use a red tail call. Doesn't matter if it's a bald eagle, doesn't matter if it's a turkey vulture, doesn't matter what it is. They always use that red tail hawk call. So it's sort of a movie star. And then I would like to mention, since most of you probably already know, the East Cascade Bird, what is it now? East Cascade Bird Alliance. Yes. East Cascade Bird Alliance sponsors a statewide, actually, it's a Western continent wide program now where we survey birds, raptors in the wintertime. And we'll very soon start using some of that data because we've been doing this now for 20 some years. And that program is run by Jeff Fleischer, and he has raptor routes in Washington and Oregon and California, Montana, Idaho, yeah, I think in Utah, Nevada. So he's just very slowly spreading through all the western states, and we're gathering really good winter data. We've got summer data on these guys, but very little winter data. So we're gathering very good winter data on all the birds of prey, the raptors. So if you haven't been involved with that program, you might want to get involved because it's a lot of fun, but it's also doing some really good work. There's our Ferruginous hawk. Uh, by the way, just to brag a little bit, these are all my photos. And the one over on the left and the bottom left is one of my favorite Ferruginous hawk photos that I ever had. It's not more than a mile from my house, and just a gorgeous bird that gave me perfect back exposure right there, and got lucky and made a nice photo. The Ferruginous hawk's population has actually increased a little bit in the period of time between 66 and '06. And probably the current population is relatively stable. One of the things about Ferruginous hawks is that they don't interact with humans as much as maybe some of the other hawks do. You don't find Ferruginous hawks in town. You can find them in some of the farmland in the wintertime, taking advantage of the high rodent content of the fields during that time. But they're often out in the real wilds of Eastern Oregon, far away from any human intervention whatsoever. And I think by being away from humans gives them a sort of an advantage, and that might explain why their population is relatively stable in the last 70 years or so. The Swainson's hawk is, to me, one of my favorites because it's just so darned interesting. It's a migratory hawk that we only have in the summertime. Comes up all the way from southern South America. Some birds, anyway, from southern South America. Those guys come up here because they like to take advantage of the uh, the of the ground squirrels that come out in the springtime around April or so. And those ground squirrels will often reproduce underneath the ground, and the first uh, squirrels to come out are babies, and they're not very in tune to what the predators are into. So those predators have a pretty easy set of meals for a while, and it's such a advantage for our local raptors that these Swainson's hawks will fly thousands of miles to get up here to take advantage of that food source. It's also a very concerning bird because the population of the entire population of Swainson's hawks um, goes south in the wintertime into the southern hemisphere, which would be summertime for them down there. And they fly down there and they have to go across several, if not a dozen or so countries to be able to get to their wintering, their summering grounds, which would be our winter. And so they have to run the gauntlet essentially of a whole bunch of different countries with a whole bunch of different laws, a whole bunch of different attitudes towards raptors, and they've been able to do that and handle that kind of pressure. And because their population has really been relatively stable all the way from the beginning of the breeding bird surveys in the '60s, all the way to the present day, and that's very heartening because this is such a great raptor. It's a bird that doesn't breed until its second year, and so that first year you have a bunch of little sort of teenagers poking around, and they don't have anything to do. So the parents sort of grab a hold of them and make them help raise the young a little bit and help out around the house, kind of. And by doing that, then they ensure the survival of their next generation, um, or the next year anyway, the offspring from the next year. And those guys they're a little bit famous for uh, having kind of the Cain and Abel syndrome, which is uh, where brothers and sisters tend to kill one another in the nest, and it's not something that happens all the time. In fact, it doesn't even happen most of the time, but it has been known to happen and recorded that the siblings will kill each other, and that's usually in times when there's not very much food around. It's not uncommon for raptors to do that. The Swainson's hawks definitely do it every once in a while, but not all the time. Another fascinating thing about this bird is that it feeds up when it comes up here. It feeds almost on nothing besides ground squirrels. It will take a vole, I'm sure, if it can find a vole, but it really concentrates on getting those ground squirrels. And when it does, it creates a dietary situation where it eats nothing but rodents for most of the summer that we have up here. When he flies back into South America, it eats almost nothing but insects. And that's really fascinating to me because the digestion, the differences between those two organisms, and I'm talking about the rodents and the insects, is pretty amazing. And so it's amazing that this bird can switch diet like that in mid cycle and be able to handle it. So the Swainson's hawk was a summertime resident. This is our sort of our winter replacement. This is the rough-legged hawk, and just one of the most beautiful things in the whole world is to have a nice snowy day and go out and photograph rough-legged hawks with their white heads and their dark bodies and their rough legs. The rough legs are called rough because the feathering goes all the way down to the toes, so you can't really see. Now I say that, and it's difficult because you can see a little bit of the legs over there of a bird on the left, but most of the time that feathering extends all the way down to tarsi, they're into the toes. Um, it's a bird that that often will hover in one place, waiting for a mouse to move, because it's used to living in places when it nests. It goes way above the tree line, way far north, up into the Arctic, and it has to hunt up there, hunting for lemmings and things like that. There's no trees to hunt from, so you have to be able to kind of hover in one spot if you want to get a high uh, perch to get a good look and see where the rodents are. When I say it's shootable because it's photographable. There are times when this bird is so tame that you can really get some really beautiful photographs of it. We have when we talk about population, the North American population was relatively stable between 66 and '06, but has been the birds in Oregon have been dropping off for some reason. About 30.7% loss in that 10-year period, according to eBird anyway. And that's a little bit concerning. What are we doing over here that's causing these guys to if not drop in population or die off, then they may be just moving somewhere else, and we don't know what that is. So we need people to get working on that little problem. Here's another bird, a very common bird that is in steep decline, which is disconcerting because we would think of American kestrel as being a fairly common bird over here. I understand that sometimes they're not as common over in the Willamette Valley, but over here, it's the second most, when we do winter raptor surveys, it's the second most common bird that we find after the red-tailed hawk is the American kestrel. And so we don't feel like it's the population is low or lowering because you just don't actually see that happening before you because the bird's so common. But if you'll notice, the population was pretty stable in the early breeding birding surveys between 1966 and 2006, but a 20% loss in Oregon, and that 20% loss is largely, as I understand it, a Western Oregon loss. The birds in Eastern Oregon are doing a little bit better, and there's some different problems going on with that bird in the West or Western part of the state anyway. Um, one of the birds that we have a lot of, and you guys get occasionally, is the prairie falcon, and it's a bird that hunts from. All the falcons are pretty fast, and this guy will actually use its speed to catch prey. But it's not like the peregrine falcon. It doesn't go way high in the air and stoop down and break the back of a duck as it's flying and trying to get away. Instead, it takes a very low profile attack and tries to stay behind low shrubbery and trees and tries to sneak around and gain a lot of speed that way, and then very quickly does a surprise attack on its prey. It's a rimrock nester that doesn't build much of a nest. It just makes a little scrape, a little place for the egg to rest on where it won't roll off and break when it falls out of the nest. And mostly it's not very migratory. We get actually more of these birds in the wintertime than we get in the summertime because they come from the outer sagebrush areas into the farmlands because it's offered them a little bit more food in the wintertime. Population is pretty stable early on in the early surveys, and a pretty significant loss of 15.7% in Oregon in between 2012 and 22. Everybody knows the story. I think everyone knows the story about the sage grouse. Sage grouse population is really plummeting. If you notice, it used to be over 10 million birds in the western part of North America, and now it's down to less than a third of a million birds. So that's an amazing drop, to go from 10 million to a third of a million. It has to do with degradation of their habitat, often by development or by grazing or by lots of different things. But the major cause again is just the destruction of their habitat and not allowing them to have the food and resources and places to hide and places to breed that they need to have. One of the things we talk about is a solution to this problem, and we can do a whole program on the sage grouse with its problems and its solutions. But the population, uh, when it is clearly dropping a whole bunch in our area, for a while we went without any known leks, by the public known leks anyway. Uh, we went without those for a couple of years, and we weren't able to actually see sage grouse in Central Oregon. And now we're in a position where there's just a couple of places where you can go and watch birds dance and from a safe distance and get a chance to see that awesome display of nature that if you haven't seen, you have to do that sometime in your life. It's just amazing. The solution, though, that I think is very encouraging is the East Cascades Bird Alliance, again, is developing programs where they're working with local ranchers and landowners to come up with some solutions to this rapid decline of these wonderful birds. And really what they're doing is they're coming up with solutions like, let's pay landowners to raise sage grouse, essentially, to increase certain habitats on their land, so that sage grouse will do better, and we'll pay them to do that. That's going to take a lot of fundraising, and we understand that. The East Cascade Bird Alliance has a great group of people that are working on this problem. And one of the things that they're doing is they're trying to come up with solutions that benefit local landowners and local ranchers, so that they'll be on board and do this. Because just trying to restrict people, it doesn't work very well in Eastern Oregon, and probably doesn't work that well anywhere. So anyway, some great stuff going on. If you look at the numbers up there, North American population really took a hit in since 1970 anyway. And this is a little different number than the Breeding Bird Survey numbers that we've been using. This is Partners in Flight number. Since 1970 to current times, the population of this bird in North America is where it's a native anyway. But in North America, it's lost 67% of its population, and that's steep. That's one of the highest losses that we've had of any bird in this program, of any bird in the entire continent anyway. And then in Oregon, then our losses between 2012 and 22 are about 25%, about a quarter of the birds. And that's just not sustainable. If we keep doing that for the next 3 or 4 or 5 decades, we're going to lose this bird for sure. So there are things that are in the works that are being done to try to stop that from happening. Everybody likes the good mountain quail, I'm sure. I get a lot of requests to take people birding over here in Central Oregon, and they almost always tell me the same thing. Sorry, the same thing. They want to see mountain quail, and seeing mountain quail is not the easiest thing in the world. It's actually a little bit easier over where you guys live in the hills and mountains of the Coast Range to your west than it is over here. But it's pretty tough over here to find these guys. It's an interesting bird in a lot of different ways, but one is that its population is a little weird. And one of the reasons it's a little weird is that this bird can be found in lots of different kinds of habitats. And it's often found in canyons. It's often found in forests. It's found in clear cuts. It's found in forest fire burned areas. Often it needs to have some kind of a slope or some kind of a cliff or some kind of elevation change anyway. It likes those kind of areas. So canyons are really good for it. But for the most part, it can be found in a whole bunch of different places and different habitats for sure. The population's been low but stable for a long time in Oregon, especially, and about 3% increase in Oregon, and about 16.5% in Oregon between 2012 and 22. The difference between those two numbers, 3% and 3% is throughout its entire range in the West, and 16.5 is just talking about just in Oregon itself. So population's looking pretty good for these guys. It's one of our success stories. I'm not sure we can pat ourselves on the back because I doubt if we have that much to do with it, but the bird's doing fairly well by itself. If you look at the map over on the left, this gives you an idea. If you go into the eBird, if you go into the eBird section or open eBird up, and there's a section at the top that says science. And if you open that up and find the thing that says trends, open trends up, it'll give you a map like this, and it gives you an idea of how well these birds are doing. And the red dots here are birds that are declining. The blue dots are birds that are increasing. And the size of the dot has to do with how fast they're either declining or decreasing. So as you can see over in Western Oregon and Western Northern California, the birds are really doing quite well. It's on the east side, on the dry sides, where they're not doing very well at all. And that's where I live. Another very common bird that's in steep decline is the northern flicker. And here you can see a, a bird that has some odd coloration to it. Most of our birds are red-shafted flickers. This bird right here looks like it's a bit of a hybrid, actually, between the red-shafted and the yellow-shafted. But its current North American population is about 11 million birds. So you think, well, that bird can't be in trouble if it has 11 million birds. But its population has gone down nearly 50% between 66 and 2019. So that's an incredible amount of loss in the overall population. And it continues to show a loss in eBird data between 2012 and 2022. So some of our birds, that are so common to us, are actually in a bit of trouble. It's just that we don't see it because they're still so common. But one day you may look up and go, I haven't seen a flicker for a couple of years. That would be pretty tragic. We have both northern shrikes and loggerhead shrikes, and the northern shrike I'll take on first. It's a winter bird. We just had a loggerhead shrike this morning in Central Oregon on our trip out to the eastern parts of Crook County, and so that bird's kind of late. Usually they're moving by now and moving. They're moving south for the winter anyway. The loggerhead shrikes are. They're often called the butcher bird because they'll take their prey and hang them from a thorn or a barbed wire or something like that, and come back and feed on them later. Um, they're both shrikes are a little bit hard to survey. Northern shrike's not too bad, and you can see over on the upper right hand corner over there. Oh, sorry. In the upper right hand corner shows you a little graph that shows their population, and they're looking at CBC data here of northern shrikes being measured. But that's a little bit misleading because the northern shrike um, comes south in the wintertime, but it doesn't always come all the way south. It stays a good portion of the population will stay up in the northern areas that are difficult to survey in the wintertime. And they're almost impossible to survey in the summertime in the breeding bird surveys because they go up into the boreal forest so deep into that forest that it's hard to pay people to go up there and actually survey them into those remote areas. The northern shrike. The loggerhead shrike is a little bit easier because it's a bird that migrates north and south almost within the borders of the United States, leaks down into Mexico for sure. But take a look at the map over here for this particular loggerhead shrike. That map is showing you the population trends that are going on. And remember, red is bad. Big red is really bad. And blue is good. And so there's very few blue dots going on over there and a whole lot of red dots. So about a quarter of these birds were lost between 12 and 22 in the United States, and about 16.6 of Oregon's birds blinked out between 2012 and 2022. One of my favorite birds in the juniper forest around Central Oregon is the ash-coated flycatcher. This bird can go an entire summer without drinking because it gets most of its water from its food. If you look at the map here on this guy, the blue dots are really very prominent, and there are very few red dots. So the population of this bird is doing quite well. And it's not surprising because the habitat that it prefers is juniper habitat. And then the western juniper is widespread here in Central Oregon and doing quite well. It doesn't have too much trouble thriving over in this kind of environment. So that bird's had a good place to, or its preferred hunting area and nesting area is increasing. So it's increasing as well. Population continent wide between 66 and 93 went up just a little bit. But in Oregon, the population has gained about 13.8% in the 10 years between 12 and 22. So that's a good success story there, the Astrodid flycatcher. Western kingbirds, not so good. This is a very aggressive bird. It's a very famous bird called the kingbird because they don't put up with other birds being around them very much. They don't like them. They'll run everybody off. It's not uncommon here in Central Oregon to be looking up and go, oh, hey, there's a golden eagle. And then all of a sudden this other little bird is attacking that golden eagle. And it's a Western kingbird. The Western kingbird is not afraid of anybody, even a golden eagle. 16.1% loss in the continent between 66 and 06, and 14.8% loss in Oregon statewide between 12 and 22. It's not a very common bird in Western Oregon, but in Eastern Oregon, it's a very common bird. And to see them leaking away, 15% here, 14% there, it's a little bit disconcerting. One of their saving points is that they do often nest on power poles and often nest in open areas like clear cuts. So we have quite a few clear cuts over here and quite a few power poles. So I guess we're doing our part in sort of an offhand way to try to save this bird. Next one is gray flycatcher, and another bird that's really ubiquitous in the sagebrush and juniper forests of Central Oregon and the high desert over here. And its population is doing quite well, actually, continent-wide. Early on in the early years, 66 to 06, it went up almost a quarter of birds to 22.8%. And then almost 2% gain in Oregon in the years between 12 and 22. So it's doing quite well. It is one of those little impids that's difficult to identify, but there are a couple of things to look for. One is that nice rounded head, kind of gives it a cute look compared to some of the other impids. And one of the things that really makes it easy to identify is that quite a few of the other impids will pull their tail up and sort of flick it up a little bit like a wren almost, and they'll flick it over and over and over again, and that gives you an indication that it might be one of those impid flycatchers. Well, this bird pulled its tail down instead of flicking it up, and that behavior is not a constant, so it's not 100% useful, but it does do it a lot. And so if you watch a bird that you think might be a gray flycatcher, if you watch it for 5 minutes, you're likely to see it do that, where the tail will be at rest, sort of sticking straight out, and then it will pull that tail down and real slow and then flick it back up. And so that's a pretty good field mark to separate these guys. Next bird is, one of the poster children for the high desert and the dry lands of Central Oregon is the sage thrasher. And we'll go straight to the numbers. 52% loss continent-wide between 66 and 06, and about 22.2% loss in Oregon between 12 and 22. Well, those are really concerning numbers. So definitely something we have to take a look at. And again, it has the same problem that the sage grouse have, and some of the other birds that are sort of sage obligate organisms. If you ruin the sage, then you're going to ruin this bird's habitat, and you're going to have a drop in population. And that's kind of what's been happening. Some of our actions are detrimental to the habitat in which this bird likes to live. So I always tell people that sage thrashers remind me of Mick Jagger, and they go, "Why?" And they go, "Well, it just goes to show you if you can sing pretty well, then the girls will just swoon after you." Because I don't think Mick gets his or used to get his uh, female followers uh, by being a good-looking guy. I think that mostly his singing was what was the thing, and this is the same with this bird. This bird's a singer. It likes to sing, especially early in the morning, and it has a very long song. It just goes on and on and on and on, and it's one of the really wonderful sounds of the early morning high desert. Is the song of the sage thrasher. 52% loss in the continent, 22.2% loss in Oregon. That's a bird that we need to be developing habitat for as well. I put the raven in here not because it's only found in the eastern Oregon, but because it's a bird that causes a lot of problems in and of itself. Now, I want to stress the fact that it's still a bird species and it should be considered with all the other birds as important. But it can be a little bit problematic because it's a bird that likes to eat the young of other species, and it likes to pick on sage grouse in particular. And so one of its favorite meals is baby sage grouse, and we're trying to save the sage grouse. So the uh, the raven population and having it go up and up and up and up is seriously causing a problem with a lot of different birds, but sage grouse in particular. This increased 16 or 17.5% in Oregon between 2012 and 2022. And the overall population in North America and South America is just on the rise completely, and it's good for the raven, but a little bit not so good for everybody else. Uh my I said poster child earlier. This is my real poster child. I have a personal connection to this bird. Um, we used to every morning have a flock of about 50 to 100 Pinyon Jays come and wake us up in the summertime every day. And we haven't seen a Pinyon Jay stop at our house, stop at one of our feeders now for 5 or 6 years. And the population of this bird is just tanking. And especially tanked in a historic way between 1966 and 2006. It suffered an 85% drop in its population. Now, if you look at some of the other numbers in this presentation, 85% is the highest drop of any species that I'm going to talk to you about. And so this is really important. And one of the big problems is we're not really even entirely sure why that they're dropping. And so that makes it even scarier because we don't know for sure how we're going to do a solution if we don't know what the problem is. Um, the Yeah, well, I just love Pinyon Jays, and it's the fact that I can't find Pinyon Jays in my county, in Crook County, is a real heartbreaker for me because I just love seeing and hearing Pinyon Jays. Another bird that seems like a real common bird to us in Eastern Oregon is the mountain chickadee. And mountain chickadees, you can't imagine them being a problem with their population or having a problem with their population, but they do. 40% loss in the continent early on, so their population took a big dive before or after 1966. And since then, they've kind of come back a little bit. Part of that is because these birds have found and learned to use human feeders quite a bit, but they've also gained by crops and agriculture that America or that humans have brought to their environment. So we've got a little bit of a gain in the last uh, the last 2000 the 10 years between 12 and 22 anyway. I love these guys because I say they're a half ounce of hustle because they never stop. They just go all day long and they don't even seem to care sometimes that you're standing there looking at them because very often, like other chickadees, if you're feeding the feeder or filling a feeder, you're going to have an opportunity to have one of these land on your hat or on your shoulder and sit there and talk to you and say, hurry up, get that thing hung up. I got work to do. And they they'll grab a seed and go bury it somewhere, not bury it, they'll go stash it somewhere in a crack in a tree or another hiding place of some kind anyway. To me, they're a metabolic wonder because I know in nature, the smaller you are, the faster you lose heat. This is a little tiny, dinky little guy who spends the very, very cold winters right here in Central Oregon. They don't migrate anywhere, and they're able to lose heat like that and still survive because they spend their whole summer caching food, and they'll have a lot to eat during the wintertime. That's the only way they can make it. Very nice bird, but a bird that's in historically in steep decline now. Uh, Maybe not so much now, and but it's still a bird that's concerning because the population dropped so much in those early years. Um, Even if we're coming back a little bit at a time, we've got a long ways to go to completely save this bird. Um, just a gorgeous little bird of the western United States and a little bit of Mexico. Uh, the canyon wren is suffering a bit of a loss in the continent, but a gain in Oregon, a pretty significant gain in Oregon of between 2012 and 22. And you can see this actually reflected in the eBird map that's over on the left-hand side there. You have a bunch of loss going on, a bunch of population decline going on in the Southwest. But in Oregon, Idaho, and Southeast Washington, the population is actually doing quite well. So it's a bird that we have less concern about locally anyway, but the overall population is still in uh, uh, it's still fragile. It's not in trouble because the population is gaining, but it's still a little bit fragile, and we're keeping an eye on it for sure. We need to. Rock Band is not such a success story. They had a little, almost a 40% decline between 1970 and 2014, but a loss in Oregon of 13% between 2012. So, I mean, a relatively steady decline between 1970 and 2022. And that's something that has to be reversed because we would hate to lose. If you haven't, this is not a bird that you probably have there in Salem very often. And if you have not heard all the different songs that this bird can sing on a desert morning when the other sage birds are making noise around you, then all of a sudden you can hear this. It sounds a bit sometimes like a mockingbird, just all kinds of crazy trills and runs and things, and it's just a gorgeous little singer of the high desert. We'd hate to lose that population. 3.4 million birds in North America, so it's a bird that's not low in population in particular, but it's a bird that is declining, and so that's concerning to us. The Brewer's blackbird, not really a blackbird, because if you watch it for any time period, you'll watch it turn purple or you'll watch it turn a little green. So the shine will be uh, lots of different colors if you watch it for any period of time. But the male is definitely black in most lighting situations anyway, with the bright yellow eye. The female over on the right is kind of slate gray brown without a yellow eye. And they form these very large flocks. We saw flocks of maybe 150 birds today. And in the wintertime, they'll get into flocks of sometimes near 1,000 birds, mixed flocks of blackbirds and starlings, and maybe a few other things. They like to flock together for sure, especially in the wintertime. Their population's in decline, despite the fact that they are able to take advantage of the agricultural events that go on that produce winter food for them. So that population loss is a little bit puzzling, I think, because that's 57% per year loss continent wide and 20% loss in Oregon between 12 and 22. You know, the story with the Western meadowlark in Western Oregon, it's a little hard to find, and populations there actually, if you look carefully, there are some blue dots over there, so population relatively stable over there in Western Oregon. Eastern Oregon, we have a lot more of these species, and of this species, and their populations are not doing well. You can see those red dots, big old red dots, means they're losing ground. This is the Oregon state bird, voted on by school children back in 1927 as our state bird, and it's been our state bird since then. Even though a couple people have decided that they didn't like that, but it's remained our state bird, which I'm happy about. 40% loss between 66 and 06. And that loss has slowed down quite a bit here in Oregon anyway. But we're still not on a gain, so we'd love to be in the positive. The mountain bluebird is one of obviously everyone's favorites. My favorite story is that I had a person that came from Maine and they wanted to see nothing. Their main thing was they wanted to see a mountain bluebird, and so I knew where there was one that would fight itself if you parked a car next to it, it would fight itself in the mirror of the car. So I sort of pulled up and positioned the car right next to where the bird was, and I was distracting the lady, and the bird came and landed right on their windowsill, right next to her, with right with where she could almost kiss it, and she got a little tear in her eye. She was so happy she got to see her mountain bluebird that way. Wonderful little guy. We all know that the population of this bird was diving pretty hard early on in the 20th century anyway, and was one of the birds that was saved by the introduction of nest boxes throughout the continent. But even with that, their population had dropped quite a bit in the between 60s and 2006, and looks like continuing to drop here in Oregon in the last 10 years or so. Horned lark is one of those birds another bird that's a small bird that lives in the snow and cold and wind of Eastern Oregon. They seem to love it because they just flock in huge flocks, sometimes of nearly 1,000 birds. And my favorite, because if you find a big flock like that, sometimes you can find the other birds like snow buntings or Lapland longspurs or something like that. That's very nice. The streaked horned larks that you guys have in the West are kind of a different story. Their numbers have never been very high, and they're not very high now. 1,500 to maybe 2,000 total birds, but they make very little impact as far as the overall statewide or continent-wide population. That population is pretty stable, or was pretty stable back in the 60s to 2006, but now we're starting to lose birds a little bit, according to eBird anyway. And so it's a bird that lives out in that dry, sagey area that some of the sage thrashers and sage grouse live in, and you can imagine that it starts having problems when they start having problems. Black-throated gray warbler is another bird that's relatively found in lots of different habitats, but it's found out here in our area in the on the butte slopes that are close to water, usually around reservoirs and lakes and places like that. You can often find it in the forest. You can find it over on the coast. You can find it in a lot of different places. But here, it prefers to be in an elevated area near water of some kind of river or a lake. The global population is quite a few of these. If you've ever been to South America, when the migration is on, you know that for sure. 49% loss back between 70 and 2014, and a 15% loss since then. This is a bird that's in trouble. We need to save it. Bush tits population. I'm going to skip through the bush tits a little bit because we're running a little low on time now. Bush tit population is relatively stable, according to eBird and according to BBS. And that's good news because there's not a cuter bird alive, as far as I'm concerned, as these little bush tits. I'm trying to imagine. I've tried in the past to imagine a world where that doesn't have lazuli buntings in it, and that's just it's not fathomable. It's something I can even fathom. And the good news is that's not really happening right now. They're doing quite well. 6.5% gain in continent wide early on, and then they continue that gain into the 20s. 2020s, and we're happy to see that because few things give your heart more joy than seeing a lazuli bunting fly into your yard or fly into a tree next to where you're birding. in the sparrow world, savanna sparrows are really suffering. If you look at that whole continent picture over there, a whole lot of breeding bird surveys done in different parts of northern United States, southern Canada, up in the northern Canada area. You know, it's a bird that is found all over the place, especially in open country. And my goodness, it's losing 15 and almost 16% of its of the birds bird population in Oregon is it's down that far, and it's just a little crazy and a little bit disconcerting. 18.4% loss early on, so this has been going on for a long time, and it's just something that we have to address. You might be wondering what I mean by Georgia on my mind. This bird was not named after the fact that it likes to live out in prairie country or savanna country. Instead, it was named after Atlanta, Georgia, I mean, after Savannah, Georgia, where it was first identified. Lark sparrow, another real wonderful bird that you find up in the high desert. I know this bird's been found all over the state, probably every county in the state, but it's very relatively common in patches over here on the east side. This bird has went down 61% uh, in the years 66 to 2006 in the western United States. Did much better in the eastern United States, but still a 15.7% loss in 12 to 22 means that this bird's still in a bit of trouble. This is an important bird to me because this is my spark bird. This is the bird that I first saw when I bought my first spotting scope. I was driving out in the country and I saw a bird fly and land in the road. So I got my brand new scope out and I put it on my very first bird with the scope. And the very first bird was this, the most beautiful of all the sparrows that we have, the lark sparrow. So wonderful little guy, but 61% loss in the West. That's very scary. Brewer sparrows, kind of the same story. 49% loss in the continent. Uh, half of the birds in a 50-year period there, or 60 or 40-year period anyway. Half the birds population is gone in that little short period of time, and we continue to lose them. And it's hard for me to imagine this bird being in trouble because I can go almost anywhere in sagebrush territory or sagebrush habitat, and I can find these brewer sparrows just about every time. And it's hard to imagine that they might not be here one day if we don't do something about it. Vesper sparrows, we saw a number of them. They're starting to move now over here. Their population is doing a little bit better. They did suffer some losses, but they were small continent wide. But here in Oregon, 15.7% is more than we want to be able to sustain. So we want to keep an eye on those guys. The sagebrush sparrow that we have over here it has an interesting past with its name. It used to be called Bell's sparrow before 1910, and then they split it into Bell's and Sage sparrow in 1910, and then they put them back together again and made just the sage sparrow in 1957, and then they split them up again and called them now the sagebrush sparrow and bell sparrow, and that's where they stand today. But this is a little bird that we have. We are so lucky to have this bird because it's just one of those that is only found in the sagebrush of the high desert. Not only because you can find this bird a little bit in southern Oregon where it's dry as well, but it's a bird that we get to see quite often, and a lot of people in Oregon don't get to see it very often. I'll draw your attention to the eBird map over on the left. And in Oregon, between 12 and 22, we had an overall net gain, even though there were some huge losses in the southeastern corner of Oregon. Those were overridden by some great gains in the center part portion of their range out there in the high desert. So it had some trouble early on with 50% loss between 66 and 06, but the current population looks pretty good. Green-tailed towhees, just to go straight to the map, it's got some problems in the western portion of its range, and that's sort of almost the foothills of the Cascades, or the lower elevations in the Cascades. but in the eastern part, in the dryland areas, it's doing quite well. Overall, the population is relatively stable or growing just a little bit. Okay, that's the group of birds that I chose to show you guys and talk about. The question becomes then, how do you turn this thing around if we've got birds that we're losing that we don't want to lose? And there's a couple of things we can do if my thing will work here. We know how to bring back birds. We knew what we were doing when we brought the ducks back. We know how to do it when we brought the peregrine falcon back, and when we brought the the whooping cranes back. We know how to do this. The problem is it takes resources, and it's going to take a massive effort because we're talking about a massive number of birds, billions and billions of birds. And so we're going to have to get organized and get together. It's going to cost a lot of money, and that money's going to have to come from us. The general public is probably not going to really care that much, not enough to give a whole lot of money. And we may be able to do something about that. Political resistance is going to get ugly because that's what politics does. And so that's going to be a problem as well. But the problem is that failure is just not an option at all. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to say, we have to turn this thing around. How are we going to do it? My suggestion in a real quick way, because we're about done here, my suggestion is take some money and get some money to organizations that are working on the problem of population degradation, and give your money to conservation, and let's get this thing and turn the corner a little bit and saving some of these birds from utter extinction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. So we have some time for questions and answers. Anybody have a question for Chuck? And let me look in the chat session here. If you on in Zoom have a question for Chuck, please just type it into chat or into the Q&A, and I'll monitor that. Any questions? There are a few positive things happening here in the Valley in terms of protecting habitat. We have spent about $100 million of Bonneville Power funds on our Willamette Valley Wildlife Mitigation Program, which has acquired, and Ray could talk more about this than me, but many properties that were designed to create habitat for our wildlife and mitigation, doing restoration on them. Ray has his hand raised. Salem Audubon does do surveys for those properties, and we've been doing that for about the last 10 years. That helps support those efforts.
Anything you can do.
And Gray and Ray could probably talk about this too. We have our land trusts.
Yeah.
And we got our Greenbelt Land Trust and some other land trusts that have the same purpose.
Yeah. And I think anytime you can find organizations like Salem Audubon that are working hard to try to turn this thing around, and throw some money at them, because they need that money to operate. They need that money to recruit new people to help, and that's money well spent for sure. And we know from past experience that will work, that it will work to pump money into conservation, and then conservation will happen. So that's my soapbox, I think, of the entire presentation is take the money that you have that's extra and put it to work.
Thanks, Chuck. That's certainly right. So if you look at the example of the duck stamps, and how much money has been raised since 1934, I think, when duck stamps started, and all of the restoration that's gone on in the Canadian prairies and in the United States, and supporting waterfowl. As far as the wildlife mitigation program, which is the outcome of a settlement agreement between the state of Oregon and Bonneville Power Administration for habitat lost in their transmission lines and other facilities from Bonneville. That agreement was for a target of 16,000, a few hundred acres to be acquired by 2025. So the program is winding down. If all of the parcels that were last put up for adoption have been adopted, if they've carried out their due diligence and gone through to closing, then that target has been met and then some. And that program has been really bolstered by money coming in that did not have to be. So there were in-kind donations of land, in-kind donations of equipment. There was money put up as match. As Tim was saying, land trusts have played a big role there in acquiring some of these lands and protecting them. The Warm Springs, Siletz, and Grand Ronde tribes own a bunch of these properties that they've acquired through the mitigation program. Those are all being managed for conservation. We have one here, the Minto Island Conservation Area, was bought with mitigation program funds. So the mitigation program acquired fee title ownership of properties. They also acquired conservation easements, such as the conservation easement. No, wrong one. So it's been really successful. We have an annual meeting coming up in December to look at where the program is now. There was consideration with Bonneville, I think, going on over this last year or so about how to use the uncommitted funds. So some of those may be going back into the annual maintenance, the restoration, the O&M on these lands. Anyway, it's a big successful program, 16,000 acres of really diverse habitats. ODFW has acquired a bunch of parcels around Fern Ridge Reservoir. City of Eugene has a bunch. They're scattered all up and down the Willamette Valley. It's a good thing.
Well, I'm very glad that you brought up the idea of duck stamps too, because I think one of the things that's daunting is the amount of money it's going to take to try to save the passerines or the neotropic migrants. The amount of money it's going to take to save them in a way that the duck population has been basically rescued by programs like the duck stamp. Because I think one way to raise a lot of money would be to develop a neotropic migrant stamp or something similar to that. Come up with a little sexier name than that, maybe. But there are more bird watchers in Oregon and around the United States than there are hunters, and the hunters have been very successful in getting those duck populations to turn around. And we could do the same thing if we got a group of people somehow to get all the bird watchers that we have, get them involved with donating money to conservation and getting involved in conservation themselves. And if we could do that on a big scale, we could turn this thing around.
That'd be really cool. You know, one of the differences is way back yonder in the 30s, the waterfowl hunting community, especially in the East, went to the federal government and said, we really want to contribute. How can we make that happen? Well, the mechanism for it, of course, was buy a duck stamp. And if you didn't buy a duck stamp, you couldn't hunt.
Right.
So the hunters were contributing a lot of money there, but it's obligatory to them. And the issue, I think the difficulty that comes up when you're talking about birders or the rest of us, we can go out and do that without ever spending money. So there needs to be some way to really get the conservation community engaged in citizen science to find out what's really going on and into fundraising in collaboration with ODFW and other conservation organizations. I don't know what that hook is. That's a really difficult one. You know,
I think smarter people than me definitely are going to have to work on that problem. But on a national level, there's some awfully smart people around there. I think that we should be able to figure that out. And I think that organizations like Audubon and a few other national organizations, we need to find some way to get the public involved in supporting birds, because as I said, there are millions and millions of bird people out there that may not be birders, they may not be bird watchers even, but they might be bird feeders or so just someone who appreciates the pigeons in the park. And those are people that if we can get in touch with them, we can raise that money.
I wanted to give our city of Salem some credit too, because they took the initiative to get the money from Bonneville to acquire the conservation area, to extend Minto Brown Park out to 1,200 acres, which is managed for wildlife. The
it's
largest
fantastic.
park we have in Salem is managed for wildlife.
Yeah.
The city's also acquired other parcels that they are doing restoration work on, and Salem Audubon are doing the surveys on them. And they tell us those surveys are instrumental in defending these efforts and this expenditure of money with their city council. So I just wanted to end with two other things I started with, how you could get involved. Our own nature reserve, our own Ankeny Hill Nature Center has as one of its major efforts is restoration of that 25 acres. And you could join Bobby and her team to do some of that restoration work on a regular basis. And also, I mentioned our own West Salem Nature Reserve. That's a big part of what they're doing is restoring that parcel, not just maintaining trails, but they're eradicating the non-natives and planting native plants and creating habitat for wildlife at those sites. So those are some things you can get involved in to try to turn these trends.
Yeah, fantastic.
You want to finish up?
So I just wanted to say how grateful we are that Chuck Gates was able to give his presentation tonight. I know I learned a lot about the status of our native birds in Central and Eastern Oregon. And so I'm very glad that he came. And I just thank you very much, Chuck, to spend your time.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I hope everybody takes away from this that it's not all doom and gloom. There's some great successes out there, but we've got work to do.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.